Opening kickoff powered by Black Pitch Coffee and blackpitchcoffee.com. And so now we go to the palatial studios of Parts Unknown and catch up with our friend Alex Abnos and find out what is going on. How are you, my friend? Good morning, and thank you for being our Ricky Henderson this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's great to be here.
You caught me in my first hydration break of the show.
Sorry about that.
That's all good. We believe in hydration, so if you need a hydration break while you're here, it's perfectly fine.
I got some coffee.
There you go. And what is the mug this morning?
It's the official Guardian office mug.
Ooh.
It says, what does this one say? Facts are sacred.
Yes, and we agree. Circle gets the square. Couple of reasons I wanted to have you on this morning. I would be remiss if I did not ask you about the white smoke in Two Penn Plaza that happened a couple days ago. And now we have a new commissioner in Larry Berg at Major League Soccer. How do I know that I'm asking you this question? Because you asked a question. And that's why I'm asking you questions now that you've had a day or so to think about it. Takeaways from now Larry Berg is the new commissioner of Major League Soccer taking over in 2027. What's your vibe coming out of it with a day or so?
I mean, it's early. We're not even 24 hours into him being named, and he doesn't officially take the job until January 1st of 2027. So he's got a few months here to sort of get his bearings in the new position. But I think that if you are the type of person that thinks MLS needs to make pretty drastic changes to its on-field product, make it maybe easier for more teams to buy great players, to loosen up roster restrictions, those sorts of things. I mean, ultimately, Larry Berg works at the behest of 30 MLS owners, so it's not all his doing. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. But I do think he's the kind of person that's going to push those people to be a little bit more, let's say, liberal with the spending, be a little bit less cautious than MLS has been. Keep in mind the history of MLS is basically tiny incremental changes. And I do think that made sense for a very, very long time, given where soccer was in 1996 when MLS started, and certainly where MLS was when Don Garber took over at the turn of the century. It was on life support, basically, and needed everything, all the stability it could get. That's not a problem anymore. MLS ain't going anywhere. It's got buildings all over the country. It's got a legitimately great training facilities in most markets. The time has come to really make a push. Honestly, the time to make a push was before the World Cup, so that people like me and you aren't getting questions from people that are just getting into soccer asking things like, when does MLS start? I've gotten this question from 5 separate people now in my life just since the World Cup ended.
Wow.
And I think that is just, you can read that positively. Like, great. These people are, experienced World Cup soccer and now want to experience more soccer, and they're going to MLS, and that's good for the league. You can also see it very negatively, which is, first of all, I don't have a great thing to tell them, which is that, well, it's already been going for a few months, and if the team closest to you is really bad, then sorry, you're just going to have to watch some bad soccer for a while. And the other thing is that it's not good that they don't know. It's not good that they don't know that the schedule of MLS. I don't know if getting great players or improving the quality on the field is going to solve all of those problems. But I do think Larry Berg is the type of commissioner that's going to be focused more on those things than Don Garber was.
When you said turn of the century, I was like, man, that. I mean, it's like, yeah, you put the whole thing in context. It was just like, yes, he's been here, more than 25 and not quite 30 years. But the fact that he has been here taking, single entity structure and going to where the league is now, it just, when you said that phrase, I'm like, yes, he's been commissioner since year X. And you're like, yeah, okay, you take it. But then you go turn of the century, and that's just kind of like, bang, that's one of the early morning sledgehammers on you.
Yeah, the phrase that really stuck out for me during the presentation and during the news coverage and everything that I wrote, I think, in my story, is that Larry Berg becomes MLS's 3rd ever commissioner. I was just like, that's such a low number. Even for a league that's relatively new like MLS, 3 commissioners over the life of 31 years or so is pretty impressive. And, Don Garber gets a lot of criticism, much of it deserved. I think he also deserves more than his fair share of credit for keeping the league alive during those early years, for the growth that happened under him. I think the time was definitely right to move on. but he also deserves a fair bit of credit for everything that's happened in MLS under his watch.
The Pittsburgh Steelers of professional sports leagues.
Yeah, pretty much.
So I guess that would make him Chuck Noll and Larry Berg, hopefully Mike Tomlin. I think that's how
Yeah,
this is going to work.
sure.
Or Bill Cowher or something like that.
Yeah.
I knew I skipped somebody. The other reason that I brought you in was really the first reason that I brought you in. And it has to do with a story that I think we have to keep an eye on. And it came out late last month in Austin, Texas, involving Austin FC. And it is where academy players are under investigation by the police and FBI for allegations of youth-on-youth sexual abuse. And this will be today's required flashback reading for the audience in whatever form they consume us. But I wanted to kind of have you walk us through this to where the Guardian was confident enough to post a story of this import and make sure that everything is buttoned up, and your role there as major domo editor and all this kind of stuff. I want to kind of walk folks through this story, A, because it's important, we need to hang on to it, and B, how you came across it and all of those things. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say from the outset, just at the risk of frustrating people with everything I'm about to say, that this is an extremely tricky story, and for a lot of very obvious reasons. I mean, any kind of story, once you're dealing with allegations of sexual abuse or misconduct or whatever it may be, are always tricky. But this one especially so because it involves children, and in this case, children on children. Is the sort of conflict that we're talking about here, and I think it's also important in terms of the way that we reported the story, that you separate two things. One of which is the thing itself that's being investigated, the youth on youth sexual abuse thing that's being investigated, which we did not go into detail about because we just don't have a lot there that we can report, that we can put in the paper, quote unquote. We have no paper in the US. We do in the UK, but not in the US. And the existence of the investigation. And it's important that you separate those two things because there are very different levels of, let's say, confirmation or sourcing and definitive evidence that we can get for those two things. When you're talking about allegations of sexual abuse between two entities, whoever they are, two people, that requires like as journalists, we can't publish anything unless we are 100% sure that it happened, or that we can at least say this person says that it happened and make very, very clear that it is an allegation and not a statement of fact. And once you're talking about anything relating to sexual abuse, misconduct, those sorts of things, the line for proof of that is extremely high, and it should be, because if you get that wrong, that is a stain on that person's character forever. This stuff exists on the internet forever, and it's something really, really bad, basically. The existence of the investigation, by comparison, is much easier to prove because it is on paper. It is a public record, or at least a semi-public record, depending on how sealed or unsealed the details may be. You may not be able to see the investigation itself, but the Austin, Texas Police Department confirmed for us, after we heard from sources that this investigation exists, that the investigation exists. And that to me is news. That to me is the kernel that we were sort of building off, that gave us license to write the rest of the story that we did. And that's basically how it works. We had heard from sources that there was something going on in the Austin FC Academy. We made a bunch of different calls to a bunch of different people in and around the academy, in and around the league, who we heard was involved in the investigation, who did know a thing or two and were giving us some information about that, at the club, obviously. And, we were able to put that all together into the story you read. I don't know if it's going to be the last story that you read from us or from somebody else about this, but that's basically how it came together. And the thing that allowed us to publish it is that it's focused on the existence of the investigation and the fact that the FBI is involved. And you'll notice that there are no real details in there about what specifically is contained in the investigation or what specifically the allegations are. And that's because we just don't have those things in a spot where we can report them, and we might never have that information in a spot where we can report them. And that's just kind of what journalism is.
You and Pablo Maurer share the byline, and I say paper too. So trust me, it's okay to say paper, periodical paper, what have you, because I'm
in print.
Yes, I'm 700 years old, so for me it's easy to say paper. The story in and of itself was bylined on the 24th of July. How far back an investigation was this for the Guardian to get to July 24th at 5:45 in the afternoon to where you published the story? How far back do we go here?
So this one, I have worked on a bunch of stories like this almost entirely as an editor, and they traditionally take a very, very long time. This one was different. This one came together very, very quickly in the space of about, I want to say, maybe a week and a half.
Wow.
And it's because, again, the scope of it is so limited. The scope of the story is literally the existence of the investigation, roughly what the investigation is about, and the target of the investigation, which are the kids within the Austin FC Academy. Those three things together, I think, are more than enough to merit a news story, which is why we did what we did. There is probably a wider story to tell that will take much, 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 much longer. We are working on things. We're following up on a lot of things that we heard during the reporting of this first story that we couldn't get to the point to where we could put it into publication, trying to get those details over the line. Any story like this, you hear a lot. Like any story you read that's along these lines, it's very, very, very rare that what you as a reader read in the story is 100% of what the reporters have heard over the life of reporting the story. There are false details. There are things that people misremember. There are details that you're like 99% sure are true and they sound true, but you just can't get them over the line. You can't get enough confirmation. You can't get enough people saying that they happened. So it takes a long, long time. This one, again, because it was so, so, so limited and so based on the existence of one public document. There is a document, there is a police report, there is an investigation report somewhere, enabled us to move much quicker on this than we would if it were a more detailed investigation, is what I'd say.
For background and sourcing and all of that, obviously there are the folks that don't want to go on record by name, but they'll give you background and all of that kind of stuff. They want to stay anonymous for various reasons that are understandable. When it comes to vetting and sourcing and anonymous versus on the record, what is the Guardian policy / philosophy of making sure, okay, this one corroborates this one? How deep is that process when it comes to this or putting out a story of this import?
It's incredibly important, and especially because, as you said, we are dealing almost entirely with sources that would like to remain anonymous. And this is something I think that a lot more people should know or be familiar with. I don't think hardly anybody really understands, other than journalists, the difference between on the record, off the record, on background, and the various levels there within. And without getting, again, to journalism 101 here, basically the way this goes is if you're a journalist and you're having a conversation with a source about anything, doesn't matter the topic. Off the record, first of all, very important to know, is an agreement between the journalist and the person that you're talking to. It is not one-sided. So one person can't say this is off the record and then just talk without the journalist saying, or the other person saying, okay, like both sides have to agree this is off the record. And once it is off the record, the journalist obviously you can talk, you can say whatever, but the information they give you, the information they give you cannot be used in print, and in theory, can't be used in the course of reporting. In practice, many, many journalists use that information in the course of reporting, but maybe obscure where it comes from. But the point is that if it's off the record, you cannot print it. Sometimes people will have off the record conversations with sources, and then go and verify that information with maybe 2 or 3 other people, and then come back to that original source and say, can we go on background or something like that? And again, it's a conversation. All of these things are a conversation between a source and a journalist. Above off the record, you have on background. And this is where things get really, really murky because different publications, different countries. I work at the Guardian, which is a British publication with a really, really big and active American arm, which is obviously where I work. The American definition of on background is very, very different from the UK definition of on background. So we run into this in our own newsroom all the time. In the US, on background is, there are different levels of it, but usually it's, you can use the information they give you. Sometimes you can quote them directly. So if they say, I saw Johnny running this way, then you can put in the paper, quote, I saw Johnny running this way. Sometimes they say, I don't want to be quoted, I just want to give you the information. But regardless, you could almost never use their name. And then once again, it becomes a discussion about how you attribute them. So this is why sometimes you'll see a source with knowledge, or a league source, or a club source, or a source familiar with negotiations. Or sometimes people want to be very cautious, and they'll just say a source, which is the least, like, as a journalist, you always want to be as detailed as possible. So the conversation with on background is always, can I push this person to be just like even a little bit more detailed in their attribution so that the readers get a better idea of where this information is coming from. And then on the record is on the record. On the record is, you can quote them fully and directly, you can use their name, their title, whatever. And that's the easiest. But on background gets really murky, and I think a lot of people have a lot of different sort of impressions of what that means. And it is very flexible. I think the most important thing to remember is that it's always a conversation, and it's always an agreement between the journalist and the source you're talking to. I had a lot of conversations like that. They're not long conversations. They're usually like 30 seconds, like, hey, I would like to attribute you this way. I would prefer you attribute me this way. Yeah. And you reach common ground.
You mentioned the conversations, and I'll phrase it that way, with both sides of the Atlantic when it comes to how the U.S. newsroom classifies something and how the British newsroom classifies something. How often are these two newsrooms sitting there, and it's like, if you sit there and you go, no, look here, it's this way, and then the British newsroom is like, well, we do this, and you're like, well, over here we do this. How many times do you have to have that conversation about, yeah, things are a little different over here when it comes to our phraseology and how we're building a story?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting. I think I will say at the Guardian, there is a lot of respect on both sides of the Atlantic for the way our respective newsrooms do business. I'm not going to, like, the Guardian is a UK brand that's existed for 200 years over there. I'm not going to tell them how to source their stuff just for the amount of readers that they get in the US. Like, why would I do that? And I would say, by the same token, they've been very respectful of our traditions and what we sort of see. And there hasn't really been a whole lot of conflict like I've experienced in some places that I've worked in the past. I will say that I think the British definition of on background, basically the biggest difference is that the British, I think there's less expectation of attribution for facts, whereas like in the US, you're more likely to read says a source or say two sources close to negotiations or whatever. In British journalism, you are way more likely to read just the thing. Player X is going to transfer to Chelsea. You might say the Guardian understands. That's a very British construction. Is publication X understands that FIFA has met in Rabat, Morocco, and Gianni Infantino said X, Y, and Z or whatever. Those sorts of things. Yeah. Whereas, like, if it were a purely American publication reporting on that same thing, they might say 3 sources, including one that was in the room, said Gianni Infantino in Rabat, Morocco said X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. It's just a different level of expectation within the newsroom and from readership. So I don't know. I wish I had like a more fiery answer for you, but it really is just a kind of a conversation. It does also depend very much on the newsroom that it's coming out of. I think there's generally an agreement here at The Guardian that if there's a story coming from the American newsroom, so one of our writers is doing it, one of our editors is editing it, that it will be written using all the standard U.S. sourcing language and things like that, and vice versa for the UK. There are times when we collaborate. We haven't really collaborated too directly on anything that requires this sort of conversation, but when and if that happens, I'm sure we'll be in several Zoom meetings that are probably very entertaining to us and not so much to anybody that doesn't care about the process of journalism.
Yeah. But like I said, that's why I wanted to have you on for a J101 version of explaining where things come to pass with this.
Sure.
My follow-up is, where does the Guardian investigation stand in trying to gather more information as you're trying to update the story and find out where things are?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we heard. What I'll say is this: we heard about a lot of things in the course of doing our very first story that we could not print
Mm-hmm.
for various reasons. The mostly being that, like, they're the sorts of things that you need multiple sources and a 110% degree of certainty to publish, and also keep in mind that these are minors involved, and that adds an element where you have to be especially cautious and probably even less likely to name the people involved. In fact, I would say it's almost 100% likely that, like, even if we were to do, or any publication were to do, a big, long, detailed piece about everything that's ever happened in the Austin FC Academy, it's very, very, very unlikely that any kids would be named for very obvious reasons, I would hope.
Yeah.
So we're following up on a lot of those things and trying to get, something that the standard in journalism is generally, if you hear the same people or the same thing separately from two people, that is like, that in some cases is enough to run a story. For something like this, I want to hear it from three people. I want to hear it from as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're just going through that process, and it takes a really, really long time because these are the sorts of things that people are not generally super eager to open up about.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, they just want it to go away. They want to move on. They certainly don't want to re-traumatize their kids. So it's a process. It's a long, 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 long process. So we are working on things. We're talking to people, but any potential follow-up story that we could do that might provide more detail into what specifically has been happening at the Austin FC Academy, at MLS academies, and youth soccer in general, is, I would say, a long, long way off from happening, and it has to be.
And that's why we're going to put a bookmark in this conversation right here, because
Right.
that's why, like I said, that's why I wanted to have you on, because of the story, because of its import. And I wanted folks to understand, to put a story like this together to where it is posted and available, all of the processes that have to go through, because yes, this is chapter 1 and you've got other parts to this to continue, but I wanted folks to kind of understand the walkthrough and all of this stuff. And that's why.
And I will just to give you a sense of the timeline here. I was the editor on the Paul Riley story that ran in The Athletic, that paused games around the NWSL and started that whole conversation back when it was released about player-coach relationships in the league. That story was, I think, worked on over the course of, I want to say, 5 or 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
From I got the first, I was Meg's first call after she sort of learned the first inkling of information, and from then it was a long, long, slow process because you're just chasing every lead that you can and trying to get them to talk about things in a way where you can assemble a timeline in a way that not only confirms information, but that also creates a story that people want to read and that actually reveals something about the state of the league and the state of the thing that you're talking about. So I would imagine something like that kind of timeline is probably what we're dealing with here, but I don't really know yet. We're still very early in the process.
Well, I can't thank you enough for hopping on and batting leadoff for us this morning to to explain the story and processes and all this kind of stuff as we bookmark the story and our conversation going forward. I can't thank you enough, my friend. Continue your caffeination and permission to come back and visit and hang out and talk about other things that aren't as serious or that are as serious and other topics that folks need to know about. Thanks for coming on, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and you continue your hydration. We'll both be having our beverages, and it'll be great. Thank you so much.
Be good. There goes Alex Abnos. He is a Grand Exalted Poobah, otherwise known as Senior Sports Editor, The Guardian on the U.S. side.